Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, Paul's guest is Robb Wolf. Robb is a former research biochemist and 2 times New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of The Paleo Solution and Wired to Eat. Along with Diana Rodgers, he co-authored the book Sacred Cow, which explains why well-raised meat is good for us and good for the planet. Robb has transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people around the world via his top-ranked Apple podcast, books, and seminars. He has also co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms in the world, the Healthy Rebellion community platform, and is the co-founder of Drink Element Electrolytes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review at the top of the show page on Spotify or at the bottom of the show page if you are listening on Apple Podcast. Your opinions matter, and your ratings help us to grow and help more people to be healthy, find freedom of body and mind, and to live their dreams. We hope you enjoy the conversation between Paul and Robb as they discuss the big picture.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, I've got Robb Wolf, who I've been trying to get on my podcast for over 3 years, and we finally made it happen. Our topic today is the big picture. Robb and I are going to look at some of the key issues that people are very confused about worldwide, and I'm going to access Robb's genius to see what kind of clarity we can bring to some of these things. Many of you already know who Robb Wolf is. I don't really think he needs an introduction. As a lot of you know, he's written many great books. He's well known for his work. He's done a lot of research, and he is a guy that knows what's going on. So welcome, Robb.
Huge honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Robb, as I said, I want to hit some of the key points where there's a lot of confusion, particularly in areas you have expertise. My first one relates to diets. Robb, as you know, human beings are forever jumping from one diet craze to another, and each time it's one miracle after another. But having been a therapist and a life coach for 39 years, I've seen that they all have a shelf life, and what starts out as a good diet ends up being not so good. Personally, I teach people how to have a functional relationship with their body so that they can adjust their diets and supplements and things like that based on their needs in real time, as opposed to following somebody else's prescription. Could you share your views in this regard and give us a summary of what you offer in your book, Wired to Eat?
Yeah. It's interesting. Humans are the only animal on the planet that are really legitimately confused about what they should or shouldn't eat. It's
Yes.
I guess if you just let a bunch of animals loose in a grocery store, they might make some bad food choices, but that's because they're in an unnatural environment. But for good or ill, humans are pretty crafty, and we have technology, and we've been able to really modify our world and our landscape and our access to food. And I think it's brought us to a spot now. I think that might get this number wrong, but it's in the ballpark. Something like 72% of calories consumed in the United States come from what we would consider hyper palatable, highly processed foods. It's something that our grandparents would look at and just not really recognize as normal food. And so for me, I've always had this kind of home base. Like, I think about it when I was a little kid and we would play tag. You had like a safe home base that you tried to get back to. And I don't feel like people have much of that. And I do think that to the degree like a quote diet is beneficial, is that it gives you some lane lines to try to stay out of the gutter, basically, if we use kind of a bowling analogy. And so I've always used kind of a ancestral health, paleo, lowish carb type diet, at least as a beginning point. It is seldom times the case that somebody will be on that protocol forever, but as a beginning, like you had mentioned, that you try to get folks to a point where they can adjust, supplements and maybe macronutrients in flight. And I think that that's a really laudable place to get folks to. But in the beginning, oftentimes folks are just so overwhelmed, with the minutia and the details and everything. So usually some sort of carbohydrate capping and looking towards food quality it seems like a great place to start. Adequate protein, for satiety and for nutrient density. And then just being a little bit aware of immunogenic foods. Like I have celiac disease, so I really can't do gluten. I also, in the past, have had ulcerative colitis and rheumatoid arthritis, and I've noticed that I've got some reactivity to. I don't do spectacularly well with nightshades. Like, it's not that I can't have a tomato, but I maybe don't want to have like tomato sauce on my food 3 days in a row. It's like I can have it a
Right.
day, but maybe not 3 days. Dairy, I discovered, unless it's like goat dairy or sheep dairy, some of this A2 dairy I can handle, but the standard A1 bovine dairy, the protein in it just, it flares up my rheumatoid arthritis. And so I think that, we start off with kind of a nutrient dense, whole food, kind of protein centric approach, have an eye towards carbohydrate tolerance, and then just a little bit of awareness about immunogenic foods. I don't think everybody in the world is gluten intolerant. I don't think everybody in the world has issues with nightshades and whatnot, but a lot of people do. Like autoimmune disease is one of these just skyrocketing issues that we face, and I think that a lot of folks get benefit not only from not overeating generally in that context, but being aware that there might be some foods that actually irritate the immune system and kind of precipitate these autoimmune reactions. And that's largely what Wired to Eat talks about. It really looks at the world from kind of that perspective and really tries to figure out what is a way that somebody free living can eat such that they don't overeat. It's one thing to have like a metabolic ward trial where we could feed people pure sugar or pure this or pure that, and they don't overeat because they have no access to anything else. But not everybody, fortunately, lives in a metabolic ward. So we have to set ourselves up in a way that when we get, we're winding down in the evening, do we have little Debbie snack cakes in the pantry? Do we have some sort of delectable ice cream in the freezer? And it's not to say that we never have that stuff, but it is a great example. There was a study that was done looking at how people consumed peanut M&Ms. And I think peanut M&Ms are pretty awesome. I'm not super into sweet stuff. I'm more of a salty, crunchy kind of guy, but peanut M&Ms happen to be both sweet and salty and crunchy. So they really, they really tick a lot of
I love them,
the
but
boxes.
they kill me, but I love them too.
Yeah,
I just if I could have a treat that I could, put in my pack sack on a long hike, it would be peanut M&Ms.
They're pretty amazing, and it was a crafty study that was done. They put a bowl of peanut M&Ms on the desktop for folks, and they weighed how many M&Ms were there, and then they could track how many they ate through the day. The next group of people, the M&Ms were at their desktop, but they had to scoot their chair back, open a drawer, reach down into the drawer, get a handful of M&Ms, close the drawer, get set up again. And then the next group of people, they had a big bowl of M&Ms in the middle of the office, but you basically had to get up, leave your workstation, do the walk of shame across the office because everybody knew where you were going. And so you would get hazed and catcalled and all that type of stuff. But it was amazing just going from the desktop to the drawer at the desk cut consumption by half. It cut it by more than 50%. It cut it by 90% when you had to go relative to just the bowl on your desktop when you had to walk across the office because there's a social factor there. And also, like, I know when you coach people, we try to remove impediments to process. Like if somebody wants to go to the gym and get on a consistent schedule, any little thing that gets in the way can derail the person. It's in online marketing, one additional click can cut conversion rates in half. And so we can work this both to our benefit and to our detriment. And in the case of say like hyperpalatable, easy to overeat foods, we maybe want to set up a few roadblocks between us and those foods. And so not necessarily having a ton of them around, making sure that we eat some good quality, nutrient dense food. And then when we want to kick our heels up, like I really think that doing that when we're out to eat is a smart thing to do. If you want a dessert, have a dessert, do something a little different. But, unless one travels a lot, unless they work out of the house a lot, we generally eat the bulk of our meals at home, but still people tend to opt for prepared meals and, kind of highly processed foods instead of doing something that's a little more nutrient dense and less refined. And and will stick with you and tend not to leave you hungry in the long haul. And so I'm rambling now, but that really is kind of the crux of Wired to Eat. It's looking at the way our neuroregulation of appetite is set up from kind of a evolutionary biology perspective and why we're in the mess that we are today because of the ubiquity of hyperpalatable, easily accessed foods, and then sets up some strategies for how to live our lives in a way that is long-term sustainable, because you can't do something so extreme that you flame out on it and maybe go, overboard the opposite direction at some point. You do have to find some sort of an approach that is livable and workable for you. But I do think that, whether it's paleo or vegan or what, low carb, whatever, I do think as a reset, just as something to begin anew, I don't think that those are necessarily a bad starting point, but they really need to be couched as, okay, we're beginning here, and maybe, hopefully, we take a lot of what this philosophy is with us going forward, but it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly perfect to this doctrine.
Yeah. While you were speaking there, I wrote a few notes. My observation, having been in this game for 39 years now and studied countless diet philosophies and experts, what I've seen over and over again is that most people that write diet books, whether it be the South Beach diet, the Pritikin diet, the Ornish diet, ... are almost always sharing with the world the diet they found that worked for them,
right,
with the assumption that it's going to work for everybody else.
Right.
And I saw a TV show. You might have seen this. It was several years ago, many years ago now, but Barry Sears, I think it was Sears, Atkins, and Ornish.
Yeah.
We're on a show together.
Yeah.
And they just started arguing and fighting like hell with each other. I was cracking up. I'm like, oh, these guys they don't get the metabolic individuality, and that not only are people as different on the inside as they are on the outside, but people's needs change depending on the environment, their physical stress, emotional stress, mental stress. For example, if someone has a fungal or parasite infection, their whole body's cravings and what their body is trying to get into them can radically change. And then you knock out the bugs and the parasites, and they don't have those cravings anymore. And they can go from being a sugar head to living on a keto diet and feeling great.
Right.
But my point is, there's so many factors that modulate us that I just thought it was quite entertaining that these guys were so dogmatic in their views that they couldn't actually see that each of them had a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And that any given person in the audience could use either one of those guys' approach for a specific need at a specific time.
And probably would need the different approaches at various points. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The bugger is that if you want to go through the effort of writing a good diet book, being super dogmatic really helps sell books. My first book, The Paleo Solution, both books have sold well, but The Paleo Solution was pretty like paleo is the way, and definitely I have that, I draw from that orientation within Wired to Eat. But the whole point of Wired to Eat was, let's figure out how to customize this for you. And it sold well, but it didn't sell remotely as well as this like very dogmatic, this is the one and only true way, but I wrote it 10 years later and it actually worked with a lot of people. And lo and behold, orthodox paleo doesn't work for every damn person on the planet, and we need to modify and change this stuff. So there is that ironic feature there that, dogmatic dietary approaches, and I guess dogmatic approaches in general, people are definitely looking for a crowd to identify with, and diet is kind of like one of the new religions for sure. And so, yeah, it's just an ironic feature of the world we live in.
Well, it's also, unfortunately, a psychological indicator that most people want a mommy or a daddy figure to tell them what to do instead of having to think for themselves. And I think there's been no greater example of that than COVID.
Yep.
And we saw people rushing to do very dangerous things without doing any research or asking common sense questions or being concerned that on the insert there was nothing written whatsoever. And so, if they're willing to let Bill Gates be their doctor when he can't even keep viruses out of computers, you have to say there's something dangerous going on here. And then the other thing that I've observed through all my years in doing, countless amounts of functional medicine testing on people with all sorts of health issues is that consistently what I found, especially with food allergy and food intolerance testing, and the literature shows this, the more you eat any given food, the more likely you are to have an intolerance to it.
Right.
So for what the research showed, and I found this over and over again, the most common foods eaten, for example, in the United States are beef, eggs, nuts, and dairy. And those are the most common things that people have real bad problems with. So I got to the point where if I'm like giving a lecture or something and someone starts describing the problems they're having, I can look at their body and tell in 10 seconds what I'm looking at. So I'll say, if you want to make the best advance, the quickest and the cheapest, just take everything you eat the most of, put it into a 4-day rotation, and pay attention to what happens after the 4th day. Because if you eat something that you have a reaction to, but you don't realize it, by the time you go through a 4-day rotation, your immune system starts to be turned back on because you haven't been bombarding it, and you'll get a strong reaction to it. And that's a very reliable, simple approach. And I think a lot of people would be really wise to just look at, okay, do I have a habit of grazing on nuts all the time? Do I eat lots of potatoes? Do I eat lots of eggs? Do I eat eggs every day? Because the percentage of people in the world that have leaky gut syndrome is probably in the high 90s from my experience. I mean, there's very few people out there whose gut's not inflamed for all the reasons that you already know. So if you've got an inflamed gut, everything you're eating is becoming a food antigen and triggering your immune system. And the more you eat any given food, the more immune antibodies you build against it. So the more hyperreactive, and this leads to a lot of these arthritic type symptoms in people. I've had countless of people that have been diagnosed with osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. And I don't think there's a single one of them that I couldn't either completely eliminate the symptoms or radically improve, even with rheumatoid arthritis, with sound diet and lifestyle coaching and just, teaching them how to live the basics. Usually the more intense the case, the more detox protocols have to get involved because they've got so much buildup of mercury and heavy metals and environmental toxicities of plastics and everything else. So as you know, that'll just throw the whole system into complete chaos. And I think that's where fasting, if you can do it safely with some of these people, even mini fasts, like 1-day fasts, can help reset the system. And I've had a lot of really good results just by really bringing people down and trying to find ways to give their body just a break from the constant work. And a lot of these people have a bad habit of eating a huge amount of food before bed. So their whole system doesn't get to rest at night.
Right.
So they wake up with bags under their eyes. They're hot. They're tired. Their head's foggy. So what do? They eat piles of sugar and drink lots of coffee and tea, bring their cortisol levels up real high, throw their blood sugar all over the place. And they just torture themselves without realizing what's going on,
Completely agree. Yeah.
Rob, I certainly have my own opinions about Bill Gates, his farming and food strategies, and what I feel to be a complete fallacy in regard to Beyond Meat. I spoke to Kyle Kingsbury, and he said you have some valuable opinions in this regard. Could you share your thoughts on the strategies of Bill Gates and crew and your opinion on the issues that are being created by trying to stop animal farming and get people to live off of these fake meats?
Yeah, man, that's we could probably do a 3 or 4 hour podcast just on that to really give it due diligence. And I guess leading into this, one of the things that's really been frustrating for me about COVID, that's frustrating about the climate change discussion and whatnot, is that we're talking about incredibly complex multifactorial systems. We're talking about the global ecology. We're talking about economics and everything. And then we have folks blow in there and they're like, here's the answer, boom. And it's an elevator pitch answer. And from a meme perspective, producing a cognitive contagion, it's genius because you have this, one animal husbandry is the primary driver of climate change. Boom, you throw it out there and it sounds good, and you can maybe find some sciencey looking articles to support that. So what I'm nosing around here is that I'm going to try to throw some things out there, but it's really complex stuff, and I don't want to present it in a way that is so complex, and hitting so many different points that people just check out and they're overwhelmed. But at the same time, I don't want to be that person who just dismisses this stuff with a wave of the hands, because it is important and it is really, it's critical to the way that we manage the future and whatnot. But my good friend Diana Rogers and I wrote a book and made a movie called Sacred Cow, where we look at the health, environmental, and ethical considerations of a meat-inclusive food system. And in that, we got in and started poking around and looking at all of these different variables. And what is fascinating about, say, like the Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods and whatnot, is that these are largely tech-founded food companies. And they are approaching food from the perspective of technology or software, in that they want an intellectual property that they can own. You and I having some cows and some pigs and some chickens, nobody owns the IP on that. You and I can do whatever the hell we want with that within the realm of treating the animals well and life and all that type of stuff. But there really is this push to own the intellectual property of our food system. And this has been something that has been fairly well entrenched for quite some time. Just in, I'm not so freaked out about genetically modified organisms from like a detrimental health perspective. I'm really concerned about them from a market capture perspective, because you can have an organic farmer that is a couple of miles downwind of somebody who isn't an organic farmer, and the GMO seed gets blown into this organic farmer's field, and these folks have been sued for quote stealing this stuff that literally blows on the wind, and then it ends up forcing everybody to buy this intellectual property of a few, about 5 or 6 companies. So the big concerning feature that I have around Bill Gates and these folks is that they're really trying to control the totality of our global food system. And an interesting thing is that a decentralized food system where we produce and consume more food locally versus having it networked and shipped all over the planet, it's really resilient. It's great for local economic infrastructure. Like, you could have people raising the food, butchering the food, slaughtering the food, distributing the food, all at a local level. This stuff has all been intervened at kind of like the FDA federal level, so that it is highly, highly centralized, highly controlled. One of the big problems of our food system currently, and we actually saw this during COVID, is that these FDA processing plants are a chokehold in the ability for someone to disseminate food to their neighbors, basically. And we've seen this played out with like raw milk, where, or if people are familiar with the raw milk story, maybe they'll get the analogy there. But it should be quite easy to access super high quality, locally raised, processed meat virtually anywhere in the United States. But it's not. It's incredibly difficult to access that stuff. And there's been this, again, essentially a monopoly placed on the processing centers. And this does circle back into like the Bill Gates World Economic Forum. There's been this tying of our food production to the climate change narrative. And so places like Sri Lanka was an incredibly poor, developing country, lots of starvation, lots of health problems. They started developing a really robust economic infrastructure. They started producing prodigious amounts of food. They were a net food exporter. They were rapidly on their way to becoming what we would call a first world, or a fully developed nation with very low poverty, very low hunger and starvation. And on a dime, they pivoted and said, we need to shift our whole process to organic. Now, I'm a huge fan of organic, sustainable, food production. But if you've got a whole system that is reliant on synthetic chemical fertilizers and things that have problems, but it works for today, you can't just shift that whole thing overnight and expect to have happen anything other than what it did. And Sri Lanka right now is in absolute chaos. Like they are suffering starvation, economic implosion. So this is something that should have been graded out over like a 10 or 15-year period where you parcel out areas that transition into a more regenerative practice. Within the Netherlands, there has been a huge push by the government. They have acquired over 3,000 local farms and taken them offline because under the guise of suggesting that this is going to mitigate climate change, which is absolutely. Right. I'm just going to say it's false, and I hate just saying that because this is something that I should get in and defend and explain. But I'm going to suggest to people that this is false, and I have other materials elsewhere that get into it more deeply. But pre-COVID, Bill Gates recorded an interview where he shared that his investments in vaccines dwarfed the wealth that he had ever gained from technology. So like the greatest wealth he's ever developed is by investing in vaccines. And the thing that he's invested in next has been food. He's the largest individual private holder of farmland in the United States. He's invested heavily in these kind of fake meat alternative items. And so there's a narrative that animal husbandry is injurious to the environment, that it accelerates climate change due to mismanagement of land and overuse of water and the release of methane into the atmosphere and whatnot. And it all plays into this ability to control our food systems. And I don't know if you want me to kind of get in and unpack some of those peripheral things like the methane.
Whatever you want to share. Well, I think it's important. I mean, I've been hitting on this. I read Vandana Shiva's book Oneness versus the 1%, which unveiled Bill Gates like like a coroner's dissection. It was shocking. And even though I know a lot about it and have studied a lot, that book really opened my eyes to just how seriously criminal he is and how dangerous his ideas are. So I think whatever you want to share that you have the time to share, I think is important. I've written some notes I'll loop back to later.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to let you know that the Chek Institute is offering a sale on all our advanced training programs running Monday, May 8th through Friday, May 12th. Our advanced training programs include all the integrated movement science and holistic lifestyle coach training programs, some of which are available in the online format. When I founded the Chek Institute, it was never my intention to train the masses. It was my intention to create masters that could extend their influence to the health and fitness industries and change it for the better from the inside out. I personally invite each of you that is genuinely interested in achieving mastery at a scientific, holistic approach to corrective and high-performance exercise and holistic lifestyle coaching to join me in the pursuit of excellence. Achieving mastery not only puts you at the top of your profession and makes you very valuable to others in any arena or economic environment, but teaches you the process of developing mastery. Once you've committed yourself to developing mastery in any vocation, you understand the process of achieving mastery and can apply it in other areas of your life, as well as becoming a mentor for others pursuing mastery. As you are surely aware, today we are swimming in a sea of people that are dangerously comfortable in being average. As Carl Jung so correctly said, the average man can never be successful. With mastery comes a high degree of self-confidence, self-esteem, and the ability to generate an excellent income. With the number of people worldwide that are suffering from physical, emotional, and mental health challenges, who are lost and confused as to how to create a balanced lifestyle and live a life of well-being, there has never been better job security for anyone with mastery within the Chek integrated movement science or holistic lifestyle coaching fields. You can save up to $330 on our advanced training programs and pay through an extended payment plan. You can double your savings when you pay up front. That's up to $660 savings. Anyone who registers for an advanced training program will get all their prerequisites for free. Also, an impressive savings. To reserve your spot in one of our advanced training programs, go to chekinstitute.com/May Mastery. We have limited spaces available in our 2023 and 2024 advanced training programs, but would love to have you join us in the pursuit of mastery, and I hope to meet you in person so I can give you a master's hug. See you there.
Yeah, maybe just at a surface level. So one of the things, like when people are considering dietary change and they're wondering, should I have animal products like beef or something like that in my diet or not? There's this narrative that it was released at like the World Economic Forum level, suggesting that animal husbandry drove 78% of climate change. This is an outright lie.
Yes.
The total contribution of greenhouse gases from the animal sector of like our total global story is about 2 to 3% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And even that needs to be held in a particular context. It is part of a carbon cycle. We have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Plants, via photosynthesis, pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and make protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Animals eat these plants. Some of those animals get eaten by us. Some of those animals get eaten by other critters. But when we either consume the animal or the animal via cellulosic fermentation is converting grasses into a usable food, it does produce methane, but the carbon at the core of that methane was carbon dioxide a week, a month, a year previously. And so it's all part of a cycle, and you just simply cannot equate that carbon the same way that you do mining 600 million year old coal out of the earth and getting released. And there's another layer to this, which we highlighted this both in the book and the film. It looks like properly managed grazing animals may be a remarkable hedge against the overexpression of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because these well-managed grasslands can actually sequester effectively infinite amounts of carbon. Like there is no real upper limit to the amount of carbon that these grasslands can sequester. And 2/3 of the Earth's landmass are grasslands. They're literally amenable for nothing other than producing grass and supporting the animals that co-evolved with eating grasses. And before right around the edge of the end of the last ice age, we had all kinds of megafauna that consumed different types of grasses. Even in the settling of the American West, the kind of European expansion across the West, the Great Basin from Las Vegas to Salt Lake City over to Reno, that used to be a massive grassland. Like there used to be chest-high grasses everywhere there. It did get overgrazed, and this is one of the things that's interesting. You can overgraze an area with grazing animals, you can undergraze an area with grazing animals, and both of those end up resulting in desertification, where we convert grasslands into desert. There's huge tracts of land that used to be grassland and is now desert. Literally the only tool that we have to recover that desert back into usable, productive land is via grazing animals. And this it's been pretty well established via the Savory Institute, Holistic Management International. There are some really great studies and case examples. We highlighted a gentleman who is a 5th or 6th generation Mexican rancher. He's down in the Chihuahuan Desert, and in the video, the film, we drive out to his ranch, and you drive for hours and hours and hours through this Chihuahuan Desert, and it's just scrub brush. That's all that you can see. And then on the horizon, you see what looks like a tidal wave. Like there's something out there, and you drive up on it, and it's like chest-high grasses. It's perennial grasses that the seeds have been sitting out there in the desert for 100 years. And it took this guy about 20 years of properly applied holistic management to recover about 1 million acres of desert back into grassland. So I may be crazy. I might be wrong about all of that stuff. But for your listeners, all I would throw out there is, if I'm not crazy, if what I'm describing is accurate, people like Bill Gates, World Economic Forum, all of media, all of social media are demonizing what may be the most important tool we have for actually dealing with desertification and one of these primary vectors of climate change. And I look at it a little bit like we always operate with the best information that we have. Like a surgeon wants great visual acuity. They want fantastic tactile, sensitivity when they're in doing their surgery and whatnot. You don't want your surgeon wearing glasses that make up, down, and down, up, and wearing oven mitts. And I kind of, that's a bad outcome. And I feel like that's where we are on this climate change topic. We are operating with terrible information, and it's going to result in really catastrophic problems. Like, people are going to starve, people are going to die, and it doesn't need to be that way. I think that there's a way in which we both enrich the people of the world and feed them well and improve their health, but none of it plays into a cabal of 6 or 7 giant companies owning all of the intellectual property of our food. It means that we, the people, own the intellectual property of our food, and we feed and water ourselves and our local community, and things happen in a way that is at one part 21st century technology in information processing and whatnot, but the production and distribution looks much more like a late 1800s, rural America. And so that's a lot of the stuff that we talk about in Sacred Cow. And I know that was a lot to throw at folks, but this is my concern with Bill Gates and people like him, is that they are not honest actors when they and just as a quick aside, like Impossible Foods has had hundreds of millions of dollars put into it. Every politician, music legend that you can find has supported this thing, but they've been failing because Impossible Burger is twice as expensive as grass-fed meat on a pound-per-pound basis. Because
that's crazy.
And it is kind of crazy, but there's a reality that sunlight, grass, and the evolutionary biology of grazing animals is really goddamn efficient. Like, it really works well. And trying to lab grow this stuff does not work well. It is not energy efficient. This is one of the most annoying features to me, that it is sold as a sustainable option, and it's not. It consumes more resources than just raising animals primarily on grass. And even on that, primarily grass-fed meat thing, I'm not an absolutist in that area at all. Like, cattle in particular are amazing. Like, if you do grow corn, if you do grow wheat, when you take those animals and move them through the crop residue of, after you've harvested, they upcycle the nutrients from all the stalks and the leftover pieces and fiddly bits in an amazing way. And they nutrify the soil, and they reintroduce microbiome into the soil. So I'm in this kind of weird spot in that, although I'm advocating for regenerative ag, and oftentimes people think about like polyface farms and white oak pastures and whatnot, and those are kind of some idealized representations of this, a regenerative system doesn't have to look 100% like that. Probably 70% of 60 to 70% of the meat that goes through our conventional feedlot system is technically regenerative today. And that's something that's hard for folks to really wrap their heads around, is that it wouldn't be hard to push our current system and make it into a 100% regenerative process. It's not going to look as clean and idyllic as like Polyface Farm, but the reality is that we could come back 5,000 years from now, and these operations are still not just functioning, but the soil is better, the environment is better, the water capture is even better than it is today. But that middle ground position gets me in a lot of hot water with both sides of the kind of food political spectrum. Like, again, people get very kind of religiously dogmatic about how they think this stuff should roll out, but there's a lot of nuance in the way that we can make a sustainable, effectively an infinite life cycle food system occur.
I think we need to take the genes of the Amish people and the genes of our most honest, intelligent scientists and crossbreed them so we have human beings that come out very connected to the natural principles and practices that we know have worked for thousands of years, but also available of how we can use things like advanced applications, just like they use bacteria to clean up oil spills, for example. There's many things we could do just with bacteria alone to find ways to remove glyphosate and other chemicals from the soil. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can marry the best of modern technology with the best of, shall we say, more nature and more primitive techniques that have been used for thousands of years to keep us alive and get us through hard times and everything else. I think if you go too extreme, then you miss out on some of the options that are available. And I think right now we're in a situation where we don't want to throw science out because we need answers that deliver faster than we might have been able to create 200 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think we have to be intelligent about it. I think really it all boils down to having moral, ethical principles to guide the process. And unfortunately, science has not maintained its foothold as an honest pursuit of the truth. It's become technology sold as science, which is really science used to market propaganda and profits for corporations, but the public's not able to distinguish the difference. In fact, I interviewed Irvin Laszlo and shared my concerns that what was going on during COVID and in many ways was really destroying the fabric of science. And he said to me, he said, Paul, I need you to make a distinction. He said, there's no such thing as a scientist that lives the way you're talking about. What you're talking about are technologists that are bought and paid for by corporations masquerading as scientists. And the problem is that the people can't tell the difference. That's why we have all this trouble. So I think that's an issue. You started off this conversation with memes, and most people don't. A meme is a catchy idea that wants to reproduce itself. So if you have a jingle from a song that won't get out of your head, that's a meme. A meme is really anything from a sentence to anything that you can put an encapsulation on. Things go better with Coke is a meme, but it's not a good meme. But Richard Dawkins said something very profound in this regard. Memes have no respect for genes. And I think a lot of people need to keep that in mind, because a meme just wants a brain to reproduce itself, and it doesn't care whether it's true or not.
Yeah, and Dawkins is credited with really coining that term meme and really making the case that it was similar to biology in that it wants to replicate, it wants to perpetuate itself forward, and it uses the meatware of our brains to do so. Yeah.
Yes, very true. I looked at a ton of genetic modification research when I was writing my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, which, I started doing the research for that about 3 years before it was published in 2004, actually around 2000. And I hired a professional researcher, librarian, to search the world. And I found probably a dozen studies, a lot of them from places like Russia and Europe. But every single one of them showed that whenever they introduced genetically modified foods to laboratory, most of it was done on mice and rats, that they had serious dysfunction such as brain problems, organ malformation, things like being born with their colon sticking out of their body, not even in their body, cancers, a whole pile of stuff. And one of the things that I know from a lot of study is that all plants have defense chemicals. As you know, caffeine is a defense chemical, and the research shows that plants produce caffeine because if you eat enough of it, it attacks your short-term memory. And what the researchers showed is that the animals can't remember how to get back to the plant. So that's how they protect themselves. So we drink coffee and we get a nice buzz off it. But if you drink enough of it, you'll start seeing your short-term memory going away.
Right.
And that's it's also hand in hand with adrenal exhaustion symptoms. So what they showed is it takes generations of time for any human species to learn how to adapt to the defense chemicals. Once you introduce a genetically modified food, you're introducing a plant structure that the body has no recognition of at a genetic level. We have a library. I think a lot of what our junk DNA is actually a library of all the experiences we've had through nature, so that the gene system, or the whatever mechanism you want to call it, the mind or the soul of the individual, has the ability to tap into, access information throughout our evolutionary history and use it in real time to make decisions at a subconscious level about what is or isn't edible, or what is or isn't food. So there's a threshold where you cross from a food that the body recognizes as food and something that looks like food, but the body does not know how to break it down and can't weave it into the structure of our human body. Because if Steiner showed that if the digestive system cannot completely obliterate the idea of the plant or the animal and break it down into its basic building blocks, we would not be able to maintain our human form. The example Steiner gives in one of his books is that if you locked a person in a jail and fed them nothing but lamb chops, the only reason they don't become a lamb is because the digestive system has to obliterate the idea of the lamb. So if you have a single cell of a lamb, it's got the lamb DNA, it's got the lamb spirit or soul moving through it, the lamb consciousness. But when you break that down into proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, those are the basic building blocks that everything's built out of. So now your body, through digestion, metabolism, and assimilation, can take lamb tissue to its building blocks and build human tissue out of it. But if you're not having, if you don't have a healthy gut wall and a healthy immune system, then you can't police that stuff. And this is why, for example, I've seen countless cases of people with things like skin tags, chronic problems with wax buildup in their ears, spots on their body, even precancerous formations. And once I clean their diets up and get them eating real food and get rid of all the genetically modified and processed foods, rarely ever do they have to see any doctors. All that stuff just heals itself because the body, as you know, is constantly turning its cells over. So once you give the body, if you heal the gut and give the body foods that it recognizes as food, which is based on one's genetics, and I've got many, many studies in my library showing that. A good example, I've mentioned this before, but I'll bring it up because I think if you haven't seen this, Byron Robinson, MD, this is quite some time ago now. In one of his research studies, what he did is he went into the coroner's lab and got permission to dissect bodies. And he specifically looked at bodies from different regions of the world, and he measured the entron from mouth to anus, the gut tube from mouth to anus. And what he found was that people from regions like the Inuits, where they live off of predominantly about 90% fat and protein from animal sources and fish sources, had intestinal tracts from mouth to anus as short as 21 feet. But people that came from regions that were largely vegetarian because they had no access to meat had entrons as long as 42 feet. So he showed that over time, if you don't have access to bioavailable proteins, because the plant proteins are locked up into fiber. So if you don't have enough, like a cow has multiple stomachs as fermentation chambers to extract protein from fiber, he showed that over time, the body actually lengthens the intestinal tract to give it more time to break these things down in human beings. So what I'm pointing out is that it takes a lot of time for us to adapt to an environment. And as I say to people all the time, look, if your parents came from a place where the ground freezes in the winter, you got to remember plants don't grow in ice. So your genes are going to be wired for flesh foods or you're not going to survive. So if your one parent is French and the other one's English and you start trying a vegan diet, I give you about a year to 3 years before all hell breaks loose, because you're going to have all sorts of hormone imbalances. You're going to, and you're going to see protein muscle just dropping off your body because you're going into gluconeogenesis. You're eating yourself. And I say, here we are worried about cruelty to animals, but what does it mean when you're being cruel to the only animal that can vote and change the world and make the world a better place for the animals that are getting beat up by all these ridiculous diet ideas?
Hi, everybody. I'd like to say thank you for learning and growing with me and listening to my podcast and sharing it. And while we're here together for a minute, I'd like to tell you about Symbiotica's Super Greens, which is an excellent, efficient way to boost your daily nutrition. It contains a bioavailable complex of natural plant compounds, including chlorophyll, glucoraphanin, broccoli seed, and other alkalinizing greens. This is important because even if you eat a good diet, the combination of daily life stressors coupled with the toxicity in our environment tends to acidify our body. And when we are acidic, we promote inflammatory responses in the body. When we have inflammation from stress, environmental toxins, and other factors, and are acidic, our body doesn't recover as well, we generally don't sleep as well, and we age more rapidly. Symbiotica's Super Greens not only alkalinizes our body, gives us excellent sources of plant nutrition, and promotes a healthy immune response, Super Greens support cellular detoxification. Symbiotica's Super Greens come in a lovely tasting citrus lime flavor. Your Super Greens are packed in 30 easy-to-use daily servings, and all you need to do is squeeze it in your mouth or mix it in your favorite beverage. If you want to add another aid to boost energy and support your immune system, grab some of Symbiotica's excellent vitamin C while you're there and mix it with your Super Greens, and you will have the energy and vitality to feel confident that you are doing what is important to take care of yourself and your family too. To get your Super Greens, go to bit.ly/Symbiotica, Symbiotika, L4d, all in lowercase. Once again, to get your Super Greens, go to bit.ly/Symbiotica, L4d, all lowercase. Enjoy your Super Greens, and don't forget, if you want to hop it up, get some of Symbiotica's excellent vitamin C.
The shift from commercial to organic farming, like you said, it can't be done immediately. But one of the things that people don't realize is that, some of these chemicals like glyphosate, they have like a 75-year shelf life in the soil before they start to break down. And if you look at the Demeter Association or any legitimate organic certification, the first thing they do when you apply, they come test your soil. And if they identify any toxins in there that cannot be included in organic food, the soil scientists will make a recommendation to balance your soils to get the microorganism populations up. And the microorganism populations then eat up and convert and detox the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the research I've looked at said it typically takes 2 to 3 years to go through that process, at which time you can claim that you're an organic farm, but you cannot sell your food as certified organic. Only when they've come and retested the soil and deemed the soil as clean, organic, and healthy can you then sell food as organic. Point being is, with all these people, like even I've heard in the Netherlands and place where we're having all these farming battles and stuff, they're saying, okay, the government says, okay, if you can switch to organic, go ahead and do it. But the point I'm making is you can't just switch to organic and have organic, and you're dealing with soils that are so seriously nutritional deficient. For example, research shows that you need to have between 2 and 4% organic matter in soil for it to be healthy. But most commercially farmed soils are between 0.1 and 1% organic matter because they have destroyed the organic matter, the humus in the soil. It's wiped out by all the chemicals. So if we don't have time to rebuild the topsoil and re-inoculate it with healthy bacteria from animal manures and the other sources, be it applications or biodynamic preparations, etc., and you try to switch to an organic farming model, you're really not getting organic, and you have the soil that's still traumatized. So it's kind of a dangerous concept to think that you can just switch from commercial farm soil to organic and all of a sudden have organic food, because it's not realistic to what soil science teaches us.
Well, the yields plummet, because as damaging as the application of synthetic, nitrogen fertilizer is, it's very dangerous and it destroys topsoil. As a living on credit thing, though, it looks pretty amazing. It makes a lot of food for a certain period of time. And to your point, it takes a while to be able to get an organic system back up to a spot where it could compete with the productivity there. So even just thinking about being able to continue feeding people and not causing huge famine, like this needs to be tackled in a systematic, intelligent and planned way, not just trying to spin it on a dime because we think it's a cool thing to do. Yeah,
I've got a book in my library. I don't remember the title, but I think it was written by a guy named G.T. Wrench. It was published in 1961. At that time, he said 63% of the U.S. topsoil was destroyed from commercial farming. And he did an analysis and tracked all the farming families that he could find who were generational farmers, and showed that the average American farming family wiped out and completely destroyed 7,000 acres per family of farmland through commercial farming strategies.
Right.
And that commercial farming, as we know it, was ultimately destroying the topsoil of the entire planet. And that was published in 1961, which is the year I was born, 61 years ago. So imagine what the statistics would be like now if we applied the same kind of analysis. And I actually, when I was writing my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, and developing my holistic lifestyle coaching program for my students at the Institute, I looked into desertification. How much land have we turned into desert? And right out here, east of where I live in San Diego, is a huge, huge farming basin. So I actually started looking in books to see over time how much that desert has grown. And you could literally find things like Google images and maps to show that even in the last 100 years, we have grown the desert in that farming basin significantly from chemical farming. And you could literally find maps and pictures watching this desert grow and grow and grow. And what people don't realize is we are actually, to use a Taoist term, we are yanging the topsoil to death. We're overstimulating it, over-extracting it, using things like sugar to make plants grow faster and chemicals. It's way too yang. And so what happens is there's not enough time for the soil to regenerate. It's like an endless summer, and it just burns the whole thing out. And, one of the things that drives me nuts about this whole vegan movement, which I'm going to get into with you next, is that only 4 to 6% of all the food grown and eaten in the world is organic. So you've got all this vegan push, which has been really heavy. It's petered out a little bit in the last year or two, but for a while there, it was just going crazy with people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and all sorts of people getting behind in all these movies, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yep.
And that irritated me so much. I did a 5-part series called Vegetarianism Inside Out, where I analyzed this with my senior instructor, Matt Walden, who's an osteopath and a naturopathic physician and a super sharp guy. And we just literally dissected the whole thing top to bottom. But the point I'm driving at is I've never seen a commercial or an ad or a documentary on veganism or vegetarianism ever recommend that people switch to certified organic food. So what you've got is people that are replacing animal flesh and fish with plant foods comparatively. So the volume of food they're eating is going up from plant sources, yet the grand majority of everything they're eating is coming right out of supermarkets, and it's highly toxic, and every dollar they're spending on it is contributing to the destruction not only of the topsoil, but the entire planet and the water systems and much else. So that leads me into my question. The whole vegan and vegetarianism dogma is one that I've spoken about extensively. Kyle Kingsbury talked to me recently. He's one of my best friends, so I talked to him a lot. And he said, you had some real important thoughts on vegetarian and vegan diets with regard to children. So if you would like to share your thoughts on those diet styles for children, because one of the things, I live in San Diego, and we have this huge kind of yogi vegetarian culture here. And you've got like entire schools and populations that are priding themselves on all this stuff. And I look at this and think, my God, for growing and developing children, this is a suicide mission, all promoted to be good for the world and good for people and the best diet there is. And I tell you what, I have to really breathe deep and practice all my spiritual tactics to not want to just, get on every TV station and radio and say, wake the hell up, people. You have any idea how dangerously lost you are in a belief system? And that's the problem. Anything with an ism after it is a belief system. And anytime you have a belief system, it gives you permission to stop questioning your own beliefs because you think you already know the answer. And that's extremely dangerous, whether it's religion or diet or science. As soon as you close your mind, you've signed your death warrant.
Completely agree. And, my co-author, Diana Rogers, I really have to give her the primary credit for tracking down the information in this area. So our book and film Sacred Cow, we look at the health, environmental, and ethical considerations of a meat-inclusive food system. And we weren't entirely sure where to jump in on this story. We thought that we might jump in on ethics first. But what was interesting is that when we started looking at the environmental side, and you really encapsulated it quite well there with that last bit, all of the other stuff that we could argue about, like methane and this and that and the other, we can argue back and forth about that, but it's very well accepted from everybody that we have an expiration date on our topsoil. And once the topsoil's gone,
Yes.
That's it. It's game over. Like, it doesn't matter if you're vegan or paleo, like, it's done. So we know that that's a huge problem. And the funny thing is that one of the recommendations around like the fake meat story was that you needed to use animal inclusive regenerative agriculture to keep the farmland healthy enough to make the plant material to make the fake meat. That was like one of the best scientific, which is kind of ironic and circuitous, but even those folks were acknowledging you have to have animals to keep the land healthy. So that's interesting from an ethics perspective. Like, if the way that we are eating is going to destroy the topsoil, how ethical is it to continue doing that? And then when we started looking at the health story, it's kind of one thing if you've been raised on a mixed diet and you're 20 years old and you want to do some experimentation, like you probably have anywhere from a couple of years to a decade that you can pull off a vegan diet. And if you are fortunate enough to live in a Western developed country where you can supplement with algae extracted EPA and DHA and B vitamins and zinc and all those sorts of things, you might be able to make that work. But for people in developing countries, for people who are low income, it is crystal clear that the similarities between moms developing in utero infants and then babies and children, vegan and vegetarian diets look indistinguishable from folks that are forced to live in developing countries with limited access to animal product proteins and basically, like starchy monocrops like taro or corn or what have you. And you consistently see a reduction in height, problems with dental formation, usually about a 10 to 15 point IQ difference, which all of these things are massive vectors for how successful these kids are going to be in the future. And there are developmental milestones for children if they have inadequate zinc, inadequate B vitamins. There are neurological development milestones that if they don't have the proper nutrition at those points, they never develop properly. This isn't something that can be fixed later because it's part of that genetic clock of our life cycle. If we don't have the right raw materials at the right time, we're never going to be the human being that we could have been. And so we really raise this question around, is it ethical to promote meat-free or vegetarian diets, more broadly, when we know about the just wanton nutrient deficiencies that are within these groups? And we have massive amounts of peer-reviewed resources that kind of document this stuff. And one of the most insidious areas that we see this is like in the large public school systems, where like the New York public school system, greater than 10% of the kids in that system, and this was all pre-COVID, so I'm sure these numbers are even worse now, but pre-COVID, it was acknowledged that 10% of the kids in the New York public school system are considered to be homeless. Something like 70% of the kids, the bulk of their calories, like 80% of their calories, only come from the school lunch and breakfast programs. And for some kids, and I forget the exact number, it was upwards of 20-25% of the kids, the only nutrition that they get is from the school lunch programs. And as abysmal as those programs historically have been, they at least have some mystery meat in it, some dairy products, some more nutrient dense items. But now it's been shifted to these meatless Mondays, vegan Fridays. So even the paltry amount of animal protein that is in many cases, the only, really dense nutrition that these kids are getting at all is being replaced with basically like beans and corn. And it's again, in the book, we detail what the really negative effects are for breastfeeding moms, pregnant moms, developing a fetus in utero, and then small children. So this is again another angle where we circle around on the ethics side. Like, how is it ethical to knowingly feed people food that is going to produce stunted child development? And I've been a little bit cynical about this in that you can hide these negative effects with a 20 or 30-year-old, college student or young professional. Like, you're not really going to see huge issues initially with these folks because they're not going through the same developmental process that children are. But cynically, I have said, we just need to let this thing play out because you won't be able to hide the bodies on this. We'll be
Right.
5 years, 10 years downstream, and we will see the horrible results of this experiment. But this experiment is going to destroy a whole generation of people. And in this time where people are rightfully concerned about a host of social justice topics, the people who will mostly be affected are minorities and the poor. Those are the people
Yes.
that are going to be disproportionately negatively affected from poor nutrition. And so this is one of these things that I just can't figure out. And like, I've always seen myself as being kind of like left of center politically, like kind of libertarian, but a lot of my thoughts on like the drug war and stuff like that, I've always seen myself as being kind of left of center. But what I interestingly have found myself over the last 5 years is apparently I'm an extreme right-wing conservative for my thoughts around markets and freedom and equity and stuff like that. It's really crazy. Like, I had no idea I was that person, but this is something that I cannot believe that folks that are of a more progressive mindset, they have so bought the climate change narrative that they are completely ignorant of what is going to happen to poor and minority people who are dependent on state-funded food subsidies. And those food subsidies, although already very low quality, are being shifted into this vegan and vegetarian direction. And I just, it's like a crime against humanity type thing. And all that's happening is that the people who are maximally impacted already are going to be hurt worse. And then people like Bill Gates and these mega food conglomerates are going to be made more wealthy by it. And so I'm just left wondering, where are the ethics there? Like, how is that an ethical system at all?
Well, let's take one step past ethics and ask, where are the morals there? Because by definition, a moral is a code of conduct that is life affirmative. An ethic may or may not be life affirmative. When I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division, I had about a 400-page soldier's manual I had to memorize that told me who I could kill, who I couldn't kill, and what I could or couldn't do if I captured one of those people. And that's an ethics manual, but it has nothing to do with morality, right? Most soldiers haven't got a clue if they're killing people that deserve to die. They're just doing what they're told, like bought and paid for morons, which is why I got out of the military, because I just could not kill people without knowing if it was true that they were a real threat to the United States of America. And so my only point is we need to think, what is the moral imperative? Because today we're walking on some very thin ice in many, many levels, from collapsing the oceans to hormone toxicity to fish and animals being born with sex organ malfunctions. And the list is so damn long of the research by entomologists showing that in the last 50 years, bug traffic has reduced 75%, largely due to pesticide use. And that's the sex organs of our planet. I mean, if I started adding up all the ways we are a house of cards ready to fall, almost all of it is done in the name of some kind of science, which is just immoral and unethical.
Hi, everybody. I imagine some of you are finding that your mind is not as sharp as it was, or that you can't seem to remember things as well, such as the last page you read in a book, or the key points from a meeting you just attended recently. Do you feel that your brain is taking longer to come online, or that your thinking gets muddled or fuzzy when you've got a lot to get done? If so, Organifi Pure may be just the magic you need. A key ingredient in Organifi Pure, called neurofactor, showed a significant impact on brain-derived neurotropic factor, which has been widely reported to play a critical role in neuronal development, maintenance, repair, and protection against neurodegeneration. The certified organic combination of herbs and Organifi Pure not only enhances mental clarity and promotes brain-derived neurotropic factor to stimulate the development of new neural pathways, it aids in enhanced digestion, which is important because many cognitive problems are symptoms of poor digestion. To get your Organifi Pure, go to organifi.com/Chek20. That's organifi.com/Chek20. Get 20% off with your promo code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20. That's capitals, Chek20. Enjoy Organifi Pure.
I wrote a few notes I wanted to share while you were talking. One, animal variety is critical because, and I've got research studies that I've studied that show this, what they did, you can find studies like this in the British Soil Association, you can find them in the Price Pottinger Library, the Weston A. Price Association Library. They've actually got studies, most of them were done, probably 30, 40 years ago that I've found. But what they would do is they would analyze the nutrient values in meat. And then what they found is if you took a sheep or a cow from farm A, analyzed the ratios of fats in the meat and the ratios of nutrients and the protein density, and then just went 10 miles down the road to another certified organic farm and did the same analysis, that they were never the same. And what the conclusion of the study is that it depends on what animals are fertilizing the soil, because each animal's fertilizer has a specific nutrient profile and therefore feeds a specific microorganism profile. And the microorganisms are largely responsible for feeding the nutrition to the plants that the animals are eating. So if you change the fertilizer...
I'll just throw something in there really quick. The most... refined understanding I've seen in conventional food systems around this is winemaking and their acknowledgement of terroir, like the earth. It's
yes.
This wine came from this corner of this field, and they really have it pretty well understood in winemaking. And then it seems like it's this almost pseudoscience when you suggest that it actually applies to all of life.
Yes, and so just the point being is we need animal diversity, even on farms, because the more you narrow the diversity, the more you obliterate the natural diversity in nature. And it's a living web. It's like a spider web. You can't pull on any part of the web without the whole web being affected.
Coach, what did you mention about the problem with eating only one type of food? That it becomes damaging to the system. It's fractal. It's identical on both levels there. And I'll throw this out there again. I know we're covering a lot of ground, and people maybe, I hope that they push back against this. I hope that they don't believe me at first blush on this. But so it's interesting. Historically, the Audubon Society has been pretty antagonistic, not that big of a supporter of ranching, grazing animals, out of the assumption that this is injurious to bird life in particular, but biodiversity kind of writ large. But what's interesting about that over the last 10 years, as Savory Institute hubs, places like Polyface Farm, White Oak Pastures have been showcasing this regenerative approach to food production, what they find is that when you properly apply grazing animals to these areas, insect populations explode, and then bird populations explode, invertebrate populations explode. Basically, the biodiversity really explodes in these situations. The soil microbiome diversity explodes. The root beds get 6 feet deep instead of only being 6 inches deep. And so, ironically, one of the big supporters of regenerative agriculture at this point now is the Audubon Society. And I just mentioned that to your listeners because I know what I'm throwing at them, what we are throwing at them is very counter to what the mainstream narrative is. The mainstream narrative is that animal husbandry destroys the planet, destroys ecosystems. But I would say it's exactly the opposite. It's the industrial row crop food system that is the the primary driver of the damage to the ecological systems, what you're talking about, glyphosate accumulation, damage to the topsoil. And all that I'm suggesting is that there's a world in which we can produce the food to feed the people on the planet, do it in a way that doesn't poison the people, doesn't destroy the ecology of the world. That's kind of what I'm throwing out there. And it's a lot of moving parts and a lot of stuff to unpack. But I would just implore your listeners to at least kick the tires on that idea, to give it a shot and really give it thorough scrutiny. Like, maybe I'm wrong about what I'm suggesting here, and if I am, then
You're not.
I don't think I am, but it's again, one of the things that's made me crazy over the period of COVID is that folks will suggest things with such absolute certainty
Yes.
about, it's like, we will not have inflation. Oh shit, inflation's out of control.
You'll only need one vaccination.
You only need
one
need
vaccination.
two.
You only need 12.
When
you
we
only
give
need
you
them
that
forever.
When we give you that vaccination, the vaccination stays in exactly the spot we put it. Oh, well, the spike protein does migrate through the whole body, but it's not toxic. Okay, it's toxic, but it's not, it's just like on and on and on. So I'm really trying to not be that person. Like, I do think that I've done the research, I think, but I guess what I'm leaning on is that I know your listeners are smart. I know they're well educated. Please at least just keep a wedge of open-mindedness that what I'm suggesting might be accurate, but get in and verify it. Like, trust but verify, I guess, is what I'm asking for. Yeah,
I think it's critical. I tell my students all the time, don't believe a word I say. Go out and test it for yourself. I leave a long trail of references. Go read all these references. Study yourself, but the most important thing is test it. Look, I was raised on a farm. I know the truth. I've seen commercial farms. I've been on them. I've seen the diseases. I've worked for 40 years with people that are sick and know what I have to do to rehabilitate them. So for me, I've done exactly what you said. I've looked at both arguments, and I've actually got called the human population as my scientific experiment. And they come to me with their super diets and their super pills, and I've seen it all. So, it all boils down to, what are the things that worked to get us here? And why are we aborting the thing that helped us evolve for, countless millions of years to become the people we are today? A couple of points I wanted to share with you. I'm sure you must have read Weston A. Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration.
Yep.
Well, what he showed right in there? He said right in there, he was looking to find a healthy vegetarian tribe to see if it was possible. And he could not find a healthy vegetarian tribe anywhere in the world. And he said whenever he found one close by, he would find a meat-eating tribe and compare their health analysis, and the meat-eating people, often even of the same tribal species, were healthier. And the number one limiting factor for meat consumption was one thing: availability.
Right.
The more meat any tribe had access to, the more of it they ate. So you can see there's a natural instinctual urge to get that nutrition concentration, to get the fat, to get the protein. And then you must know of Fred Provenza.
Yeah. Yep.
So, him and I are doing a series of podcasts, but, all of his research showing how much nutrients there is in meat pretty much destroys the whole vegan argument. The other thing that I wanted to share about the soil is, in my library, I have this book that I found when I was in New Zealand. And everywhere I go, I look for really good books on all the topics that I'm interested in. So I scour all the bookstores and used bookstores, and I've been doing it. I got like 5,000 books next door here, all really top-notch books. And I found a book written by a New Zealand sheep farmer. And in there, he was highlighting the fact that they have to supplement the sheep's food with selenium because the soil in New Zealand is so selenium deficient.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't supplement the sheep with selenium, they get holes in their hearts. They are born with birth defects and the hearts don't form properly. And lo and behold, the farmer himself had a heart problem. And when he went to the doctor and they analyzed him, he had a hole in his heart, just like the sheep.
Right.
So guess what he did? He said, well, if it works for the sheep, I'm going to try it. He started supplementing in his own diet with selenium. And I can't remember, it might have taken a year or two or something like that. But he kept going back to his doctor for checkups, and the doctor was amazed that the heart was actually healing the hole by itself. which the doctor had never seen done before. But the paradox of it was he was eating the same selenium that he was giving the sheep and using the same body weight to dose proportions that he was using the sheep, and he healed himself of a hole in his heart. So right again, we go right back to the soil. Another research study, I wish I could remember the name of the book it was in. You might even know about this one, but the country of Vietnam had tremendous problems with malnutrition, especially among children. And they hired an American nutritionist to come be a consultant to see if he could figure out what it was that was causing these serious problems of malnutrition. He scoured the whole country of Vietnam, analyzing the diets, and he looked at the diets of the families that had kids that were healthy, but still were in the poverty region of income. And he looked at the diets of the kids that were really suffering. He found that these poor people tended to make this soup out of mustard greens, but there was only one difference between the really unhealthy kids and the healthy kids, and that was that the healthier kids' parents were adding some shrimp into the stew.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they were eating almost the same diet. So what he did is he went back to the Vietnamese government and said, look, we need to subsidize these poor people with some shrimp. And as soon as they started putting shrimp back in, the other thing is there was an aspect to the plant. I think it might have been the tops of one of the plants, like turnips or something. The healthier kids' parents were including the tops, and the other ones thought that they weren't good to eat, so they were throwing them away. So just by keeping one half of the plant and adding a few shrimp, he was able to significantly reduce malnutrition with these two little tiny changes. So it just goes to show you that, the shrimp added a type of nutrition that you couldn't get from the plants. And then the nutrients that were added by adding the rest of the plant took kids from being sick and malnourished to being able to, grow their bodies and be somewhat healthy. So those are just some thoughts that came to me while you were talking that I thought were important for the audience to hear. The next topic I wanted to get into with you is a little different one. It's education. We have our children in Waldorf school here, which we're very blessed to have because I've studied Steiner extensively and I love his model. And it's really carefully based on how children's brains and bodies grow and develop, as opposed to some academic model ideal for adults, but not kids. And Kyle was telling me that you homeschool your children. And like me, you're very concerned that kids aren't taught what to think, but are taught how to think, which I think is critical because, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, from vegetarianism to running off to get vaccinated dangerously and believing in stupid shit by Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum, is all basically a recapitulation of the fact that our entire education system teaches people just to take what authorities say and believe it and not think for themselves. And I could give the whole history of education and how that happened because I've studied it, but I don't want to take time from your sharing. Could you share your thoughts on the importance of educating kids and why you're homeschooling your kids?
Yeah, we started off with a Montessori program. Like we had looked around and we looked at a Waldorf when we were living in Reno, Nevada. And just for whatever reason, the out of the schools that we checked out, the Montessori system seemed pretty cool. And I would say it was fantastic for preschool and even up to kindergarten. Like the girls really loved it. They really, I feel like, made good progress both on like math, reading, science, handwriting, but all this kind of art and like kind of open-ended, critical thinking type stuff. But then a good friend of my wife, she is Italian. So my wife's Italian. Her good friend is Italian, is from Rome. She was raised in the Montessori system in Italy, through and through. And what she was discovering with her two daughters, who were a couple of years ahead of my girls, is that this Montessori school had been kind of poisoned by the modern educational philosophy of like, you don't push kids too hard. It's although the Montessori system allows kids to kind of pick a lot of their own stuff, you still need repetitious exposure to things like math and reading and spelling and whatnot. And we heard some kind of horror stories that, like 7th and 8th grade kids had to listen to books on tape to do a book report because their reading comprehension was so poor that they couldn't get through a book in the time allotment that they had. And so we were spending a significant amount of money to deal with that, and didn't like the results. And it was right around this time that we decided to actually move to Texas. And so we decided to homeschool the girls for the first 6 months after we made landfall in Texas, just to get them up to speed and so that we could plug them in at the beginning of a new school year. And then COVID happened. And then everything went to hell, and schools were an even bigger disaster than what they were previously. And we just kind of, we figured out that one, historically, I've traveled a lot for my work. I think similar to you. And during COVID, I had this long period of time where I didn't travel, and I realized that being in new places and being with people is great. The coming and going absolutely sucks, and it's super impactful on my health. Yeah, it's exhausting. And so I really changed a lot of what I was up to from a career path, and decided not to travel as nearly as much as what I had done previously. And the girls really enjoyed the homeschooling process. Like, it's definitely time intensive. We have ups and we have downs. But what we did, like, from my perspective, I feel like if kids have a really solid steeping in math, if they have outstanding reading comprehension, and then they can communicate really effectively verbally and written, they can do anything. They can go do anything that they want. And I also think back to my own educational process, and there were so many history classes and so many different things that I have absolutely no recollection of because I had no interest in it. And although we kind of want a well-rounded individual, I'm not entirely sure what that is, but we have really focused again on math, reading, effective communication, both verbal and written. And we have put a fairly strong emphasis on like the Constitution, Bill of Rights, what a Western liberal democracy is versus what the rest of the world is, and what's been. And then we orient things around what the girls are interested in. So my oldest daughter, Zoe, is really into sled dogs. Like, she knows everything about Alaskan Malamutes versus Siberian Huskies and what the difference is. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And so I've oriented biology lessons around that, anatomy lessons around that, history lessons around that. So, like, the expansion of the Western territories into Alaska via sled dog. Like, I just weave everything that she's interested in, but that I want her to have some understanding around. Physics. So, like, the mu force of gravity plus friction. We introduced that because she's interested in building a dog sled, and we're in the process of doing that. My younger daughter, Sagan, is into cats. And so we've done the same thing with her. So we take all of this other stuff, history and science, biology, art, and we just orient it around these things that they have a burning passion for. Like, they just love it.
That's the way to go, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. When your heart's in it, you remember it because it becomes part of your soul.
Right.
This is who you are. You're following the heart's compass. And that's, if a person's not doing something that they're passionate about, there's no labor of love in it. So it's never sustainable. Right. People say to me all the time, Paul, how do you remember these endless citations? I say, it's simple. I only study stuff that I'm really interested in. I didn't I left school in the 9th grade because I hated studying shit that I couldn't see how it had any effect on my life. But when you study what you love, it kind of gets into your blood, and then it becomes who you are. And that's probably why you're here. I think what you're doing is perfect. And, we have, like a nanny, but he's actually a teacher, and he works with the kids when they're not in school. And I have him taking electric motors apart and piping and teaching Mana how to do things. And I have a daughter named Zoe too, which is cool. And he has Zoe, doing art, and they go out and they build things out of wood. And, I want them really engaging things that are interesting and help them see how things fit together. And it's just amazing to watch Mana and Zoe. But like these two kids, they love games. They can beat all of us at almost any game. Give them like 5 rounds on that game, no matter what it is. And some of these are complex games, and they're putting it to us. And I'm like, my daughter Zoe is 3, and she regularly beats us all in almost any game. And I'm like, there you go. You just give them something to do that they're interested in, and their brain power is incredible because they don't have all these beliefs in the way telling them what's not possible.
Right.
It's I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you about this, because I think one of the things that COVID did was really open a door for a lot of people to start getting more involved in their kids' education. And I've had countless people tell me, parents and people giving me feedback saying, wow, my kids actually do a lot better at home.
Yep.
And there's a lot of companies out there. We actually looked into this, but there's companies that will sell you the education kits so that you have like books and a plan to follow. And we went to the Steiner school teachers and got their kits so we have them at home, so that when the kids are home, and I don't want to push my kids to go to school to the point where they resent it. So with Mon, if there's days that he just doesn't want to go to school, I know he's not going to want to be there. So we just take the same model that they're using, and we know where they're at. And then we just have Michael work with Mana on that. As a kid, I hated school, and I found the more I went, the more I resented it, and the less I paid attention.
Right.
And I think it's better to let a kid follow their heart. Yes, you got to teach them the basics as you've just described. But I think if you put a sour taste in a kid's mouth about going to school in the first, 3 or 4 years, it sets the tone for their whole future. They start rejecting learning. And then, especially I find with young boys, unless they're really interested in something like auto mechanics or electronics or hunting or things like that, it's hard to get them back into an educational format because they've already got this disdain for it. So for me, I'm trying to make sure my kids don't see education as a burden, but as something that's enjoyable and explorative. And I think a lot of parents don't realize what they're actually doing to their kids. Steiner warned if you teach kids to read before the age of 7 years old, it activates their left brain hemisphere and shuts their right brain hemisphere down. So they actually start learning a lot about small compartmental ideas, but they never see the big picture of how everything fits together. And that's exactly what scientific materialism has done to the whole world and the whole education system. We've got experts in all sorts of things with PhDs that haven't got a clue how what they're telling you to do is going to affect the rest of your hormonal system or the rest of your life or the rest of nature. And I just don't want my kids being railroaded like that, because God knows, here's a paradox. We're in a world right now, one, we have an aging population. We're in a world right now where the kids of today are going to be the ones taking care of the world when you and I are too old to really do too much anymore. But the kids we're producing, as a stereotype, are dumber than a sack of hammer handles. They don't have a clue. Jamie Oliver, the famous British chef Jamie Oliver, you probably know about this, but he traveled around England and the world showing flashcards to kids, in like the, anywhere from the 1st to the 5th grade, of common fruits, vegetables, farm animals, and corporate symbols. 100% of the children in that age group could identify every single corporate symbol, but 50% of the children could not recognize common fruits, vegetables, and farm animals.
Right.
When I saw that, I saw him doing that in front of an audience on TV. And I said, this is a fucking death stroke. These are the kids that have to take over the world that our scientists and corporate idiots have completely fucked. They're not going to have a clue what to do. They wouldn't know how to start growing anything. They'd be lucky if they could grow a plant in their house. They would keep looking for a place to stick the batteries into it. I think it's scary. Turmeric's really, really hot now. There's a lot of scientific research on it. but they're not all created the same. So I brought Autumn Smith on to tell you about Paleo Valley's turmeric complex so you know exactly what the benefits are and why you, like me, should get your turmeric complex from Paleo Valley. Autumn, tell us about your turmeric complex.
At Paleo Valley, we are big believers in food as medicine. And so turmeric, of course, it has beat drugs out. We know it's anti-inflammatory. We know it has brain benefits. We know it has joint benefits. But what most people don't know is that a lot of turmeric supplements only contain one isolated compound of turmeric called curcumin. And so what we did instead was create a complex. We added organic turmeric and then ginger and rosemary and clove, which were some of the most DNA protective spices studied. And we created a complex. We added organic coconut powder and pepper for absorption. And so we've created a really high quality, highly bioavailable turmeric complex that will hopefully help you to feel your best. And all you have to do to check it out is go to paleovalley.com. That's PALEOVALLEY.com. And you can use the code CHEK15, that's lowercase CHEK 15 to save 15%.
Kind of the last stop I want to hit, because we already pretty much covered the question number 6, is this crazy ass shit going on with testosterone replacement. And I'm like unbelievably shocked at the number of young men falling into the trap of using testosterone replacement therapy, and the men that are, 50 and above. And, as you and I have been talking and I shared in my email to you, I'm 61, but I'm still strong and fit and lean. And, I can lift and train with athletes just like I did when I was in my 30s. I don't recover quite as fast. But also, at 61, I don't really have that drive I did when I was in my 30s and 40s. I reached my peak strength at 42. For my 42nd birthday, I did 42 rock climbers chin-ups, and I did 10 sets of deadlift with 500 pounds off a box, no wraps, no straps, nothing, just a pair of Birkenstock sandals and shorts. And so, but I used to train a lot harder. I used to train 3 days a week. I'd do a morning training session for 45 minutes, an afternoon training session for 45 minutes. And I would do that, and I'd shift that with rest. But as I've gotten older, I just don't give a shit. It's like I don't have to prove the Chek system anymore. My ego's kind of gotten old, and I'm like, I just train to feel good and to be functional, and more so I can go out in my rock garden and build rock sculptures and do the things I want to do. So I don't have that intensity and drive, and I have to quite often I have to, usually my normal training cycle is 2 days on, a day off. But by the time I got to be about 50, I found I couldn't recover as quick in one day. So I had to take 2 days off. But I noticed when I got to be 47 that my abdominals and my butt muscles, which has the highest percentage of fast twitch, would start to atrophy and weaken the quickest, and I just couldn't keep muscle on as quick. So having studied the science of exercise and weightlifting, I started modifying my training program so that I was getting at least 2 workouts a week, where I was going into 6 RM to 1 RM, and I could go in and like do maybe 4 sets of 4 in the deadlift at 4 RM. So 4 sets of 4, and the androgen boost I would get, I would walk out of the gym feeling like I'd been euthanized, and it would just stimulate so much androgens. And whenever I lift heavy like that, I find my metabolism a lot stronger. I'm hungrier. On a day off or 2 days off, I can go to a vegetarian diet and not even feel hungry for meat. But if I train hard, my testosterone levels jump up. All the androgens do. I feel more vital. It's like I got younger. And so I look at the issue and say, okay, if these guys, young and old, would just eat clean, pay attention to what their body wants, have a solid training philosophy with a well-designed exercise program, because most of these people out there, I've been teaching the science of program design for freaking a long time. And even people with advanced degrees in exercise and sports science, they're completely clueless as to how to design an exercise program properly, how reps, sets, loads, tempos, and rest periods affect all the variables and the physiology of the body. So they're kind of just like photocopying everybody else's programs. They're not really thinking. They don't know the science of it. So I watch all this and I'm saying, like, this is, there's some serious risks to this. I've worked with a lot of professional athletes and bodybuilders that have completely screwed them up using all kinds of different steroids and testosterone. So I understand you have looked into this. So I wanted to just give you the floor and say, what do you think's going on? What are some of the problems and what are some of the solutions?
Yeah, and I'll do a pitch to have one of my good friends, Dr. Kirk Parsley, on at a future show. He's a
Sure.
retired Navy SEAL. He's a sleep expert by training. And what was interesting when he started, so when he was a SEAL, he was kind of a pre 9/11 SEAL, and very different, very demanding, but a very different cadence post 9/11, what the SEALs were experiencing. And he actually
Yes.
was in medical school right at the post 9/11. And then when he got in and he became the dive medical director for the West Coast SEALs. And the first day of work that he showed up, he had two guys come in that basically had sleep disturbance issues. Like one guy, I always forget, like he was filling up a truck with fuel and it was a diesel truck and he filled it with gas, or it was a gas truck and he filled it with diesel, and, basically caused a big problem. And then upon questioning, it was like, well, I haven't slept in 2 weeks. That's why I made the mistake. Okay, go see the doctor. And when he went to see Kirk, Kirk was like, well, what are you doing to help yourself sleep? And he said, well, I'm taking like 5 Ambien a night and chasing it
Oh
with
my
with
God.
a pint of whiskey. And I mean, that's enough to kill probably 5 people, And
Yeah.
and so what Kirk discovered is that these guys who were very hard to break, like there's been a lot of money dumped into, what makes a SEAL, how are these guys able to make it through their different training protocols and whatnot. Peptide PYY is this neuro hormone that in some people, when people are put under stressful situations, PYY plummets and testosterone plummets and whatnot. In SEALs, like it tends to elevate. Like when they get put under really stressful circumstances, testosterone goes up, PYY goes up. So they get adaptive and they do better with that until they
Natural
don't.
warriors.
Natural warriors, but there's always a breaking point for it.
Of course.
And
That's
so,
what torture's all about.
right. And so when he started kind of unpacking this stuff, these SEALs were on night ops because we have this disproportionate benefit because of the technology we have. So they would sleep during the day, and the way that they would sleep is using Ambien, which you're not asleep, you're unconscious, you don't have normal sleep architecture, so you don't produce growth hormone, you don't get the normal like growth hormone, IGF, testosterone signaling. They're awake all night, and they're not just awake, but they've got green goggles on, the night vision stuff. So they've got the wavelength of light that is like suppressing melatonin and all this stuff. And these guys would get done with a couple of years of this, and they were just broken. And they would do
Yes.
a full workup of these guys pre-deployment and post-deployment. And pre-deployment, they might have an 1100 free testosterone, like right up at the top of the normal limit. And these guys would get home and they would have a 200 total testosterone.
Wow.
And they still were lean. They still had work capacity that would dwarf most people, but they were clearly not themselves. And Kirk had to start getting in and figuring out what was going on with them. And they had this disordered circadian biology. They had experienced innumerable traumatic brain injuries. Like every time you deploy a parachute, it's a small traumatic brain injury. Riding these Zodiacs across the water, like the rubber boats, the vibration. These guys oftentimes would end up with kidney damage. Like they would pee blood sometimes after a couple hours of this. So it would rattle their brain.
That's why motocross racers wear kidney belts. I raced motocross for years, and it's the shock, and it can really damage your kidneys.
Yeah, well, it does a number on your brain too, and
yeah, well, I probably had that too.
right, and then you throw in a really highly processed diet, a pro-inflammatory diet. And so I think that these SEALs are kind of a case study in everything that's going on wrong within society at large.
Yes.
There are opportunities for traumatic brain injury in a whole host of different circumstances. Poor diet, really altered circadian biology. Those are all kind of beginning pieces. if people are overweight, if they're carrying excess body fat, one of the weird quirks of biology is that the brain doesn't track testosterone via testosterone; it tracks it via estrogen. So both men and women produce testosterone, although women produce estrogen, but men primarily, the estrogen that we experience in our body is as a consequence of testosterone going through the aromatase enzyme in our adipose tissue and getting converted into estrogen. Well, the bastard there is that if one carries too much body fat, you convert too much testosterone into estrogen. The brain senses too much estrogen, so then it suppresses testosterone production.
Right.
And this is one of the real bastards. If you go to just some doc in the box who puts you on testosterone, they'll give you a big 200 IU bolus of testosterone, which if you're going to do TRT, you don't do a giant bolus once every 2 weeks, because humans don't produce testosterone in a giant bolus once every 2 weeks. Like at a minimum, if you've got somebody who is hypogonadic and you're going to replace it, do micro doses, do it daily, maybe even multiple times a day, very small doses, and never go super physiologic. Like try to find like a middle ground that works with that. But so even, most men, let's just focus on men because they're simpler by a mile on so many levels. But if men are carrying excess body fat, they will almost inevitably be low in testosterone, overabundant in estrogen. So we've got to modify the diet in some way. And usually some sort of a lower carb type diet is really remarkable in improving that. We've got to get these folks exercising. A little bit of zone 2 cardio to improve mitochondrial function is great. And then, like you said, lifting weights, because that androgen response from weight training is really, really profound. And then we have this thing, and you've mentioned this a couple of times, but like xenoestrogens and environmental toxicants. Our Kirk has the numbers off the top of his head, but 60-year-old men today, or the 20-year-old men today are lower in testosterone on average than 60-year-old men of 40 years ago. So there's clearly something crazy going on there. And it might be xenoestrogens in the environment, the excess adipose tissue, sedentism, altered circadian biology. I think it is definitely a multi-pronged problem there. And so I think that there is a massive amount of diet and lifestyle that can and should be done first. But then there are people that are just kind of broken, like these folks that have had traumatic brain injury. Oftentimes, if they use something like enclomiphene or Clomid, which is an HCG analog, that can send the signal from the brain to the testes to turn on testosterone production in a really pronounced way. And so a good number of men that are hypogonadic, but they're not overweight, they've ticked all the other lifestyle boxes, but they're still just kind of dragging, like they're not operating where they could be. If they go on a couple of rounds of enclomiphene, that can double their testosterone. It can take them from the low 300s to the high 700s, and they really feel good, and they start getting that vibrancy back. They start lifting weights. They start doing some of the other things that naturally feeds forward into a better hormonal profile. And then oftentimes they can titrate off that, and they find that they just needed something to kind of get them over the hump with all that stuff. And then you have some people that I for a host of reasons, whether it's hypothalamic pituitary adrenal damage because of a high glycemic diet, systemic inflammation, on and on. And again, like you have to address the diet and lifestyle features. You can't just supplement your way through this. But I do think that there is a case in a small but unfortunately growing number of people where that bioidentical hormone replacement, trying to do small doses daily, sometimes a twice daily, like a morning and late afternoon, very small dose testosterone replacement, it's a lifesaver for these folks. You do have to be aware that, like, if you're a younger guy and you still want to have kids and all that type of stuff, something like diet and lifestyle plus enclomiphene will still allow you to have normal sperm production. If you're doing testosterone replacement of any kind, your sperm production is going to be cratered. And so you really need to be aware of that. And it's also a case where if our natural endogenous production is happening, all kinds of magic happens because we have DHEA sulfate, all of the DHT, all these other cascading hormones that tend to happen in the appropriate ratios when natural biology is occurring. When you get in and start supplementing, it's really hard to get all of that stuff right. But I've definitely seen folks that they've done everything. They did the diet and lifestyle. They did the estrogen detoxes. They're using diindole methane and different things to try to deal with the estrogen excess and whatnot. And just a really small dose, what would be around like 100 milligrams a week of testosterone replacement, doing it in the AM, subcutaneous, small dose, it ends up being a life transforming event for them. So I'm definitely, I think, in the same camp as you, in that I think that there's a ton that folks need to do on a diet, lifestyle, basic cleanup interventions that need to happen. And you have to do that even if you end up finding yourself needing to do some sort of TRT. If you don't do the other stuff, the TRT is just simply not going to work. You're going to overproduce estrogen, and you're going to end up in an even worse spot than where you were. So I do think that there's a case for the TRT, but I think that it is massively overused, overprescribed. And even if you want to dabble in that stuff, you got to have the other diet and lifestyle features in place. And I guess one final thought: all of the problems happen when people start messing with super physiological doses. They start doing, 1,500 total testosterones, 2,000 total testosterones. I remember Louis Simmons from Westside Barbell, he would comment that whatever your total was that you wanted to get in powerlifting, you just took that much in milligram analog of testosterone and testosterone analogs. And those guys did. And they were monsters, but there's downsides to it. Like Louis was not that healthy in his not even that later years. He really flamed out pretty spectacularly.
Yes, and yeah, there's a few things that you brought up in me, and some lead on questions I'll ask you. One of the things that's very important for people to realize, if you study the hormonal cascade, all your androgen hormones come directly from cholesterol. So you start putting all these people on these plant-based diets and Bill Gates' mindset and all this vegan stuff, you set yourself up for androgen production problems. And that's one of the first things that happens to people. They lose all their muscle mass and they have to start eating their own body in order to get the proteins and the fats they need to make steroid hormones. So that's a death stroke. The other thing is, as we talked about previously, a lot of these people are so full of toxins, you have to kind of clean the system out because the whole hormonal system is being dysregulated, androgens and all. So that's another component. I've had 2 cases where women came to me very freaked out. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with them. They were getting hoarse in the voice, a lot of facial hair. They both had noticed their clitoris was getting larger. And they were like, what the hell's going on with me? And other doctors hadn't figured it out. And I don't know if they just didn't do enough testing or didn't know the signs of this. But in both cases, I said to them, out of curiosity, is your spouse or boyfriend an athlete? And both times they said, yes, he's a bodybuilder. I said, does he use any kind of testosterone enhancement sprays?
Creams?
Or does he take any steroids or creams? And both times the answer was yes. And I said, you sleep with him, don't you? Bingo. So once I told them that it was transferring through the skin and I tested them, and sure enough, their androgen levels were through the roof. I said, if he's going to do that, you can't sleep in the same bed with him. And you got to be really careful even making love because it's going to go right through your skin. And so they were able to actually clean off and go back to their partners and let them know what was happening. But they were very freaked out. I mean, they both had like hoarse voices and showed me they were getting hairy faces. And I didn't ask them to see the ever the proof because I trusted them on that one. But, so I just want young men to know that if you're playing with this stuff, you're putting your woman at great risk of
and your
serious
children.
hormonal imbalance. And your children.
I would throw out their children too. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because you're always touching them, playing with them, and you might even, as you were mentioning, stop yourself from having children. Could you? One of the things that I've found is that particularly with steroid use, because I've worked with countless athletes that are on steroids, and I've always warned them. But what I found is once they do steroids for very long, they can never rebound back. They can't put muscle mass on. They don't get their testicles shrink. They seem to never be able to become normal again, no matter how good they eat or anything. Can you share a little insight on what is the mechanism that basically leads them to this breakdown where they're pretty much stuck having to use testosterone or some level of steroids for the rest of their life, or they just can't even function?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is like the magnitude that they were using. It's kind of like again, if somebody is right at that upper end of normal physiological, but they're getting a little bit of performance bump, I don't think that they're as likely to see as deleterious an effect. And it's worth mentioning all of the really gnarly side effects like blood clots and prostate issues and whatnot. They all happen at the really high super physiological levels. We start down regulating production in the brain via the pituitary gland. You can have a die off of the Leydig cells in the testes, so you just simply don't have the real estate to make testosterone anymore. Like if you're bombing the body with testosterone, the body is very conservative in what it needs. And it's like, well, shoot, if we're getting testosterone from somewhere else, we don't need these cells anymore. And so if you end up with a 80% Leydig cell die-off, there's nothing there to make testosterone with anymore. And so I would just...
So you're stuck.
You're stuck. You're really stuck there. I have seen folks that used TRT within athletic circumstances, but they were just like high end and normal. Like they were already a good athlete. They were maybe fast twitch and kind of genetically gifted, and it gave them another 10%, and it kept them in their whatever activity that they were doing another 3 to 5 years or something like that, and they made money doing it. And it's kind of like, okay, but in your world, that risk reward scenarios may be worth it. But if you're like a recreational bodybuilder and you're super physiologic and you're not making any money off this, I go get a therapist and figure out what what hole in your soul you need to fill, and then lift weights and be healthy and be jacked and everything. But you don't necessarily need to push that outer envelope. I mean, it's not for me to moralize if somebody wants to be a professional bodybuilder and they want to do that, but just recognize there's some real downsides to it. Like you are really, and when you're 20, you never think that you're going to be 40 and 60 and maybe 80.
You don't think you're ever going to die either.
Yeah, and you don't fucking budget for that. And then when you hit, like I'm 50, I'm 51 now, and fortunately I'm motoring along pretty good. I had a pretty catastrophic back injury 15 years ago, which I kept working on and keep fiddling with, and that is much better now. I'm knocking on the door to getting my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. For a 51-year-old guy, I'm motoring along pretty well. And I did use enclomiphene 8 years ago for about a year and a half, because I had come off of some really serious health problems. And like my testosterone was cratered. I had systemic inflammation, gut issues. And so I actually used the enclomiphene for a period of time. And now I motor along pretty good and I feel good. Similar to you, I have to be smart about my recovery. I can do a barn burner and then I need some time to recover. I can't do a barn burner today, a barn burner tomorrow. It's not like my 20s where I could just go in and, just hammer it. But for a 51-year-old guy, I'm motoring along pretty well with my jujitsu and being able to take care of my family and be there for them. And knock on wood, hopefully I'm here for another good 30, 40 years and we'll be functional throughout the totality of that. So I guess, and it's so hard to get young guys to think about that down the road deal. But the funny thing, I guess, you might very well agree with this. In my younger years, I had so much shit to prove and I had so much ego and all this stuff going on. You get a little bit older, you get a little bit of resources, and you become comfortable in your own skin. Life is pretty goddamn good. Like it's just,
Yeah.
you're not fighting all these fights. And if you don't have much life left because you burned it all early, it kind of sucks. And I've seen people do that, like the best years really are to come in a lot of ways. So I would caution people against burning that out too early.
P3OM by Bioptimizers is hands down one of the most important supplements to have on you everywhere you go. If you're traveling, if you go to work, if you're going to friend's house to eat, this product will knock out food poisoning and almost any kind of gut disorder from viruses, bacteria, fungi, whatever could irritate your gut so quickly. It's mind blowing. I have been using this product since Wade Lightheart first turned me on to it, and he's the formulator of it. And I've got Wade here to tell us how it works, but I just want you to hear it from me. I have all my clients use this. I try to get it to friends, to family members, because it is really like your own bodyguard. So, Wade, how in the world does this thing work so well every time?
Well, as you know, we're very research oriented, and we have literally a university in Croatia that we do microbiome testing with our labs of PhDs to find out what's the most effective formulation. And we are quickly moving into the post-antibiotic world where we need to cultivate super probiotics. We all heard of super bad bacteria in hospitals and stuff that are antibiotic resistant. Well, what we did, we worked with a medical doctor that was able to take an aggressive strain of L. plantarum, which is a very aggressive strain, and then put it through almost like a BUDS camp, a Navy SEALs training, where we subjected this particular probiotic to a toxic environment. We ran a sine wave through it, and out of that survived only about somewhere between 2 and 3%. We then take that and grow it on very special food. We feed them, just like you would feed a great athlete, you feed them special food, and the probiotics develop unique capabilities. We have a US patent that is so powerful, I can't read it on the airwaves because we'd get canceled. But what I can say is when you put P3OM in your body, it goes out and breaks down any undigested protein, whether it's in your gut or through your blood system. And it becomes your Navy SEALs defense force, if you will, to go out and wipe out whatever pathogen might come in your body. You just need more of these guys to overwhelm it. It takes it out. It cleans up any messes. And for the last 18 years, I've been using P3OM daily. And I can honestly say, I've never been sick during that time. If I feel something coming on, I just double down my dosage, take 4 caps every night. If I'm traveling, I take twice that. And it's been great. A lot of our people do it, and it's one of our best-selling products, and it's available to your audience. Just go to p3om.com/living4d, put in Paul10, get a 10% discount. And if it's not the best probiotic you've ever had in your life, you get 100% of your money back. That's from us at Bioptimizers. That's our guarantee for you.
Go get it. It's for real. I love the stuff. Thank you, Wade. I found research showing that a man reaches his peak at 42. And what the research showed was that at 42, you have still got enough youth in you to really get a lot of work done, but you now have 42 years of life wisdom.
Right.
So instead of being young, dumb, and full of cum, now you've got some life experience, but you still have enough vitality in you to really make shit happen if you want to. So I think, when you're younger, you're still trying to prove yourself to yourself and everybody else. So and you have that kind of false idea that you're going to live forever, which, I've pushed to the limit and barely made it several times. But as I got older, like you're describing, I got more grateful that I survived myself and realized, okay, I don't have to prove to everybody that I'm strong or that I'm fast or that I'm smart or that I can make good money. I kind of calmed down, and I remember reaching a point probably not too far after I was 42. I think it started really coming on around then. I got leveled with a really bad neck injury. I used to do these lifting stunts where I would pick people up and put them over my head and do lunges with them. And I even had one guy in my class. He was 6'8", 250 pounds, a strong Highland Games competitor, strong man. And he was always bragging about how strong he was in class. And I knew he wasn't that strong because I'm very skilled at reading bodies and I can tell what real strength looks like. I said, if you're so frickin' strong, pick me up and put me over your head. He could not do it. The whole class was watching. I said, now I'm going to show you why I'm your teacher. But after I do this, I need you to shut up about bragging about how strong you are. So I picked him up, put him over my head, did walking lunges across the gym with him. There was a Navy SEAL in the class who weighed 210. He couldn't even budge me. I did him. I did the whole class. One day I was flying into a conference. I believe it was England, if I remember right. And I got there. I'd been on the road for a long time. I was just jet lagged and exhausted. I'd probably done like 30 or 40 presentations in a string of conferences all over the world. And these three guys came up, saw me, and begged me to do this. And I just arrived. I literally got off the airplane. It was like 9:00 at night. And I said, look, guys, I'm too tired. Can you come find me tomorrow? Maybe we can do it then. And they just kept pestering me, literally following me, like going to follow me to my hotel door, you know?
Right.
And so my ego, stupid as I was, I don't know, I was probably in my late 30s, early 40s. Probably, I mean, I guess I was a little older than that. It was after I was 43 or 44. You can tell I'm getting older. I can't remember. So I took the first guy, and he was about 165 or 170 pounds. And I said to him, look, I'm going to throw you up in the air. And it's scary because you're going to be over my head and you need to keep your body rigid, because if you're not rigid, I can't hold on to you. And he said, okay, I'll do it. Sure enough, I threw him up in the air. It's kind of like doing a clean and jerk, right, with this guy. And he got scared and he buckled and he fell right through my hands, full force. Pelvis hit my head, side bent my neck to the right. And it sounded like someone snapped a baseball bat. It was so loud. And I had lightning bolts shoot through my body. And I instantly knew I was badly injured. And I had to grab my neck. I put him on the ground. I grabbed my neck and manipulated it. And when I put the vertebra back in place, it was as loud as the initial injury. It was like my spine was so subluxed. It pinched my spinal cord, blew C5, 6, and C6, 7, just exploded them. Tore all the intertransverse and interspinal ligaments on one side. My whole left side of my body went numb, literally like someone drew a line and the left side of my body started to atrophy. I lost 24 pounds of muscle in 6 weeks. I couldn't even carry a briefcase. And then after a few weeks, the vertebra was so loose, it started floating around and pinching my spinal cord. Then all of a sudden, the left side of my body would start to hypertrophy and the right side would start to atrophy. Took me 6.5, 7 years to rehab myself to where I could actually carry anything, lift weights. And to this day, I can't work my lats very hard like I used to, because as soon as I put tone in my lats, the increased tension in the lats pulls the shoulder girdle down and loads my lower cervical spine and causes the spinal cord to get pinched. I got to be real careful pushing myself too hard. I can do like sets of 4 to 6 with 405 in the deadlift. But if I go anything past that, when I pick up the bar or put the bar down, the compression through my cervical spine causes my toe flexors to go into spasm. And sometimes my arm and hand odd muscles will go into spasm because it's pinching the spinal cord. So now I have to be really careful. I can lift, but I've got to be super conscious with my posture. I got to keep my chin a little tucked so the vertebra don't slide around. And that's after many years of very careful spine rehab, which I'm an expert at, so I have no problem, fortunately. Or they would have wanted to fuse my neck right off the bat. But I've seen too many fusions, and I've stood right there and watched them do it. And that's one of the most painful surgeries you can have. And I've seen how tough it is. And also within usually a year or two, the segment above or below the fusion blows out because of the mechanical disruption. So I've avoided any kind of surgical procedures, but I've managed to make it, 15 years now, and I'm still doing good, but I have to be really smart about it. But I guess the moral of that story is, your ego can get you in trouble.
Yes, it
And
can.
sometimes great spirit sends an ego leveler to kind of get you into your spiritual growth. And it really was a spiritual process because, I've got a background in boxing and kickboxing and, always felt strong and capable and never was afraid of anyone. But when I lost 24 pounds of muscle and couldn't even carry a briefcase, my God, a 12-year-old girl probably could have put me out. And it really put me into a crisis of self. I had to figure out, well, who am I? And it was quite embarrassing because anytime Penny and I lived on the road traveling nonstop for 25 years to build the Institute. And everywhere I would go, I'd have to have her carry even my computer bag, which caused neurological symptoms right away. And so I'd get the strangest and ugliest looks from like porters and stuff. And they'd say things like, why aren't you carrying the bags? Why have you got your poor wife so overloaded? And then I would say, well, I've got a really bad neck injury, but normally I would be carrying all this stuff, no problem. But boy, I'll tell you what, it was a real trauma to the sense of self to be so disabled, but it really brought the feminine up in me and made me realize I have to be more nurturing. And it was kind of weird because as I recovered and was still traveling and lecturing, I would have people come up to me all the time and saying, since you hurt your neck, you're so much easier to communicate to, and you're not so scary when you're on stage. I used to be afraid to even ask you a question because I thought you might jump off the stage and beat me up or something. So I think sometimes the universe gives us just what we need to grow into a more mature, awakened human being. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of these young guys chasing all this testosterone replacement and steroids don't realize they're actually trying to maintain a part of themselves that is actually really detrimental when you look at the scope of the growth and maturation of a human soul in a lifetime.
Right.
And what do we have? We got a bunch of 55-year-olds trying to be 17-year-olds, and it's just not going to work, and it's not even a good idea.
Right. Yeah, I had very similar experience. My back injury was the first time in my life that I ever felt at risk because I couldn't run. I couldn't defend myself. Like it was the weirdest thing in the world. Yeah.
Scary, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. But it does bring you deep into your core. You find out who you are beyond just physical prowess.
Right.
You got to meet the soul inside of yourself and acknowledge that you're a human being. And, I tell people all the time, look, who cares if you can squat 1,000 pounds if you can't get along with your wife and the people you work with? And I also remind people, nothing important has ever been done on this planet by a single person.
Right.
Anything we want to do that's meaningful, we have to do it with other people. We got to learn to work together and use the best of our talents as a cohesive whole. Part of this youthful drive that leads to all this testosterone steroid abuse is that there's this sort of overly individualized, ego-oriented focus that you're going to conquer the world. But you aren't going to conquer the world, actually. You're just going to conquer yourself, and you're going to end up having lots of problems in relationships. You're not going to learn to communicate effectively. And I've worked with countless martial artists and boxers that don't realize that, using force in relationships to get things done, it may work in a boxing ring, but doesn't work in the real world. And so I've often had to kind of help them transition out of this sort of aggressive behavior into learning how to navigate the world from their heart instead of their brawn, and it's just something that I think we lack. We lack wise elders and adult male leadership from people that have already lived through that to guide young men, to show them, hey, when you're in an arm wrestling contest or a jiu-jitsu contest, then give it all you got. But when it comes to, building your business, that mentality can get you in a lot of trouble. It's been a great podcast, Rob, and I really appreciate it. I'm excited to finally have made contact with you, and it's nice to talk to someone who's, we've, I think, known of each other for a long time, but you've kind of been off on your own journey researching and developing, and I've done my own journey, and we've kind of come to a lot of the same observations and conclusions, even though we've kind of been in different forests along the way, looking at the same kind of animals. As we close today, is there anything you want to share with people that you feel is important for them to hear now, or anything that's interesting that you'd like to share on what you're working on or will be released in the future?
Oh man, I guess, and we alluded to some of this, but we didn't do a COVID show, which is probably good for both of us, so that we didn't get canceled and whatnot. But
Yeah.
I guess the one thing that I would close out with is, both you and I, in some ways, have been heretics within our respective fields, but we also have a
Good thing.
a good thing. I think. I think we've got a pretty good track record of success too, which is
Yes,
empirically verifiable. It's kind of like, well, it didn't just happen once; it happens again, it happens again, it happens again, and that is kind of the scientific process. And it's also a
it is.
process of discovery. And the last couple of years, the sensibilities of the world is that there is a one way, a one authority, whether it's public health, whether it's the WEF, whatever. And those entities get some things right sometimes. They oftentimes get some things catastrophically wrong. Once they get institutionally captured by lots of money, then all bets are off. Everything is kind of questionable. But there's been this fascinating shift in people that I wouldn't have predicted 20 or 30 years ago, where folks are really comfortable with the silencing of the people around them that they disagree with. I remember
That's sickening.
it is, and it's incredibly dangerous. I think that my dad was an interesting character. He had a very difficult life, but I remember he and we had a pretty cool conversation one day, and I was kind of like, well, what do you think makes America America? Like, why is it what it is? And he's like, I think that the thing that makes America kind of unique is that he said it of himself. He said, I will die defending your right to disagree with me. And
That's beautiful.
if we all embrace that, then we're in a pretty good spot. And I think that has been jettisoned. And there's a sense that so long as my team wins, that all is going to be good. But we've danced that dance before, and it's got names like Mao and Stalin and Pol Pot attached to it.
And monocropping.
It's all the same, it's all the same stuff. Yeah. And so I would just encourage people, like, we've talked a lot of health and all the rest of this stuff, but if there's not the opportunity for both people who have the right message and the wrong message to share a message, then we're lost. Like we're heading into an abyss that it can be hundreds of years to get back from. Like we called the one of the last times this happened, the Dark Ages. And I don't want my kids to live in a dark age. I don't want, So I guess that's something that I would encourage people to think about, that even the folks that a good idea should be able to stand on its own merits. It should be able to predict the reality around us, and we should be able to have a good, vigorous conversation and debate about that, and then let the empirical evidence speak for itself, instead of trying to get media, social media, government to intervene and enforce some sort of an agenda upon us of what some people think is the truth.
Well, we saw what happened when Hitler got away with that, and it led to all sorts of problems. And here it is back again. And, I teach my students that any idea or belief worth living is worth challenging. And Carl Jung, James Hollis, many of the top psychologists and psychiatrists of the world have all said the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think, a belief system, as I said earlier, gives you an excuse to stop thinking and stop questioning. And that's a death sentence in an environment like this. And if you believe in something so strongly, but you don't question it and you don't evaluate it from different perspectives, now you've got an ism. And That's how we got Nazism and many other isms that lead to a lot of death and a lot of pain. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I couldn't agree with you more. I've studied relationships and relationship coaching and counseling a lot, because a lot of my patients with health problems, I track it right back to their relationship problems as the primary stress. And one of the things I found in my studies of relationships is that conflict is a healthy part of every relationship as long as you can stay connected at the heart to the person. Like if you and I got into an argument about something, I would still respect you. I would still connect to your heart and say, Rob's, the reason I'm even having this debate with him is because I respect him
because I
enough.
care.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Bruce Lee said, you're only as good as your opponent. So, if you keep fighting pussies, you're never going to be anything, right? You're just going to be an illusion to yourself. And the only person that will acknowledge you every time is the mirror. And that's never going to take you anywhere. So I think we all need to remember that conflict is part of growth. It's what is a wrestling match? It's a conflict that brings growth. What is a boxing match? What is a sporting event? What is a triathlon? Sports really are conflicts where we have passion and commitment to a resolution, and may the best one win, right? And that's, I always tell people, we've got to get rid of the ideas of winners and losers and take losers and call it learners, winners and learners. So if you win the debate, I gotta pay attention to what is it that Mark knows, Rob knows, or whoever knows that I don't know. If someone beat me in the boxing ring, I studied them. I didn't want to get beat twice by that person. So I think if we really have a genuine interest in the truth, which is the intention of science, then we really have to open up to each other and put all the information on the table. What does the history of vaccines tell us? What does the real research tell us? What does the injuries tell us? What are the benefits? All of this stuff. And I don't see people doing that. I see them just watching television or reading, very contrived stuff and believing it like it's fact, and then going and attacking other people because they're not wearing a mask or they're not vaccinated. And that's worse than childish. And it only goes to show, as you alluded to earlier, our education system is extremely dangerously broken, because you get people coming out of high school and college with that mentality. And look at all the censorship in high schools and colleges going on, and even elementary schools. This is not how you educate people. This is not how you create contributors to the world. This is how you create robots that march off to their own demise, thinking they're fighting for the truth, but not realizing they actually are fighting to promote the very thing that's destroying them at probably every level of their being. So thank you very much for bringing that up. Where can people find out more about you, your books? I looked on Amazon and saw several of them there. Is there any last resources you want to share, or anything you want to direct people to?
RobbWolf.com is where you can track down information about what I'm up to. I do have a Substack that is linked on RobbWolf.com, and that's my wife and I do a weekly podcast called The Healthy Rebellion Radio, and so we do a Q&A format on that, and that's it. And I just got to say, I've been a huge fan of your work I've been in this space for 23 years now, and for at least 20 of those years, you have been a primary go-to resource for me. So I just
thank you.
Yeah, it's a huge honor to finally sit down and chat with you, and you've been a huge inspiration my whole career. So thank you for sharing the time with me.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure, and I'm really grateful. And I can see you and I are operating on similar concepts. I wish I was efficient and effective at my writing as you are, because you've managed to get a lot more books sold than I have. So I think I've sold over 200,000 copies of How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy now, and we published it ourselves and had no outside help. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that there's 200,000 copies of that out there helping people get better. And
99% of books never sell more than 2,000 copies.
Is that right? Is it that bad?
It's a rough scene. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was going to publishers to try to get Eat, Move, and Be Healthy published, they told me at that time 90% of all books published never make it past the first print run. But what you're saying is even worse. So
yeah.
Well, I had to do, as you can imagine, thousands of presentations all over the world to hand sell that many books. But it's been pretty cool. There's been 3 times now I was going through customs, moving in and out of foreign countries, and customs agent look at my passport and they go, "Paul Chek, are you the guy that wrote the book How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy?"
That's awesome.
I said, "I am." They go, "I love that book." And I've gotten great feedback from customs agents.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, Rob, thank you so much. What a great share. Thanks for all you're doing. And thank you for being such a great parent. It's nice to know that there's some real genius kids coming into the world that might be able to, lead us in the future. And we not only have our interests in common, but we both named our daughter Zoe. So that's pretty cool.
It is. Our kids are going to be the ones that have to put all this shit back together. So we got to do a good job helping them. Yeah.
Amen. Well, thanks to my sponsors for all your sustainable products and your beautiful contributions to the world and highly nutritious gifts for us all. Thanks to all of you who purchase anything from the sponsors that supports the podcast so I can keep finding geniuses like Robb Wolf to share with you. And thank you to all of you. Let's all do our best to eat, move, be healthy, be living examples, think constructively, challenge our own beliefs, and connect to our hearts and go out in the world and share as much love as we can, not to make other people wrong. But I always tell my students, look, practice what you preach, and it's obvious to people. The best teacher is the silent teacher, and the best lover is the silent lover, because everybody's watching each other, and they can tell when you're healthy. They can tell when you're in your heart. So it's not like you got to go get 5 PhDs to prove anything. All you got to do is live and love fully, and you're already a great influence on the world. And that's what my podcast is all about. So I'll see you all next time. Lots of love. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, Robb Wolf. You can find Rob online at robbwolf.com and on Instagram at dasrobbwolf. That's DASROBBWOLF. To try Element, go to drinkelement.com/Paul Chek. With your order, you'll get a free gift of a sample pack with all the flavors to try or to share with a friend. That's drinkelement.com/Paul Chek. DRINKLMNT.com/Paul Chek. And you don't need a promo code to get this offer. Check out my favorites, chocolate salt and lemon habanero. You can find Paul on Instagram and TikTok at paul.chek, on Twitter at Paul Chek, or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/Living4D with Paul Chek. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com or visit the Chek Institute site at chekinstitute.com to find Paul's e-learning courses, advanced training programs, and to learn more about the Chek Academy. You can read the show notes and find links to the resources mentioned in this episode at chekinstitute.com/podcast. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review at the top of the show page on Spotify or at the bottom of the show page if you are listening on Apple Podcast.